I'm expressing my own feelings. But then the job of that record really is to incite in other people's mind, is this about me as well, and does this apply to me? You know, to put that question mark there, that it's not that simple as God or myth will save you. You know, that we have to question ourselves about what our position really is, and don't be too comfortable about just being long-haired. You know? And so, solutions, I don't know. I don't. If you give solutions, I think if anybody has solutions to give, it tends to put people in a position of either having to accept it or reject it, and that splits the people into, you know, Marxist or Trotskyist or, you know, socialist and all that, which is a problem in a way. But of course, according to dialectic materialism and those ideas, that is a natural thing that will always go on, and the thing that all those people, and us and the hippies or whatever it is, are formally against is status quo conservatism, which is unreal. It cannot be. And so our problem is really to solidify, but how do you solidify under a natural dialectic material of splitting and breaking and forming and reforming and counter-revolution? So I don't know how to come to terms with that. I don't know what the answer to that is, because obviously Mao is aware of that and keeps the ball moving, you know. But
you mean in the Cultural Revolution?
Yeah, by continually, he's obviously going by the letter and keeping the. Oh, because like Russia, you were saying, you know, what happened to Russia? It's obvious that it will happen anyway. You know, even in Cuba, it'll probably happen. And anyway, once the new power's taken over, they have to try it in a way to establish status quo, just to keep the trains running or to keep people running their factories and that. And then you're in that position.
But to keep the trains running, do you have to have, you know, repressive apparatus like Stalin? Perhaps they'd run just as well with workers' democracy. I mean,
yeah, I think that, but I still think that we're all capable. We all have bourgeois in us, and we all get tired now and then, and we all, maybe especially after a revolution, would tend to, you know, relax a little. And the amount of fervent revolutionaries after the revolution probably died off a little, you know.
In Russia they did, but they died literally.
Yeah, but how do you keep people in an activist role once they've achieved what seems to be the aim, which is to take over? How do we or any of us prevent people and ourselves from becoming apathetic again, or relaxing it, without having somebody like Mao, which is something different, which continually doesn't allow that to happen? You know, what happens when Mao goes?
I mean, having Mao there is an accidental and partial solution. I mean, it'd be better to have something built in. To the revolutionary
Well,
state.
I think he's trying to build in Maoism, but it's almost the same as building in Confucianism, or in a way it's
got to be built in via the participation of the masses.
That's the crucial thing.
If Mao personally has to keep doing that, that means when he dies, unless he's really
that's the
infiltrated all their minds completely, they will go the same way as any other people, because people are people, and obviously if all the communists always said you have to keep the revolution going continually or keep purging, then that's the difficulty, you know. I mean, if we took over in Britain, then we'd have the job of cleaning up the bourgeois, and we'd have the job of keeping people in a revolutionary state of mind, you know.
Yeah, but in Britain, with one difference between Britain now and revolutionary Russia, is that despite the fact that it is bourgeois education, the cultural and educational level of a large majority of the British people today as a whole is much, much higher than it was in a sense.
But they were literally peasants in Russia, sunk
and
in China. Ignorance and backwardness and rural.
But what I don't really think, even though relatively it's the same, apart from some kind of knowledge of what happened in 1812 or Columbus went to America, your relative human feelings are the same, and it's about eating and sleeping and fucking and do I have a roof over my head, and opportunism.
But you see, I think...
Well, what would you say to what would be the solution to that?
Well, one
Let the,
difference, John.
young generation take over.
Yeah, but they're no different from anybody else.
No, but
I mean,
John,
they're all...
It doesn't... I mean, people are what they are because of the institutions that have formed them. I mean, institutions like the family, informal ones,
Yeah.
as much as, you know, parties or anything. And the basic thing that happened in Russia is the old order collapsed under the strain of the First World War. And the revolutionaries were a tiny group. There were 30,000 people in a country of nearly 200 million.
Yeah.
Now, you say take over. What would happen in this country was the masses would have the great majority of the working people of this
Yeah.
country would have to take over.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got a great mass movement like that,
Yeah.
and we'd have to have, because this social order is not going to crumble. It's you know, they're
It's
not
going to be
going
a
to
hard,
suddenly.
long fight.
Yeah.
And that seems to me that it's in the struggle you develop the institutions which can check arbitrariness, that can check opportunism.
Yeah.
And that's why in China, where they had 20 years of struggle, they've been able to check opportunism and arbitrariness much more than in Russia, where there was just a few months.
But it was instigated by Mao himself, wasn't it? It wasn't like a national feeling of, well, there's too many opportunists and too much apathetic.
No, but
Hello? Who is it? Laundry, okay, stick it here.
But I mean,
Hello.
no, I mean the point you raise is not one of Mao on his own. It's basically one of revolutionary leadership,
Yeah.
of a revolutionary organization which has a leadership, which is precisely capable of taking the masses forward when they reach a certain level of
I mean, he
consciousness.
had to have some followers, otherwise he wouldn't have been
Sure,
able to
sure.
achieve anything. You know.
The
He's
thing-
just one man. I mean, if all the youth of China hadn't been behind him, then
Yeah.
the Cultural Revolution would have been impossible. And actually, let's face it, the Cultural Revolution didn't succeed completely. You know, I mean,
Did it not?
No.
The thing is, I think they wouldn't have to be too... Well, I mean, obviously they are fairly well behind him because they've all got the book and shouting and that. But in a society like that, or here, to allow the youth to freely, you know, ostracize the local mayor and whatever it is, you know, it wouldn't take much to get them, you know, you can bust your teachers now, you know, and you can break the university up. You know, there wouldn't have to be that sort of, well, I can't think of the word, like patriotic or whatever it is, to, you know, if the youth in Britain was suddenly given a free rein to destroy the local councils and the local schools and that, it wouldn't take too much if they were given the head by the government. But I wonder
and the
about
kids know, don't they?
the
what-
charges against Mao of sort of personality cult, that cult, personality cult. It doesn't seem to be part of the basic communist
It isn't.
idea.
It's a
I'm
very
like
unique
Khrushchev
situation.
in his book that remembers a bit. So I know he's a bit of a lad and all that. It sort of puts him down for that, saying it's like Stalinism. So what I'd like to know your opinion on that. You know.
Well, I mean, two things. In the first place, I mean, I think that a personality cult, like
Yeah.
the one which has been built up in
Yeah.
China, is alien to Marxism.
Yeah.
You know, because Marxism is basically about ideas.
Yeah.
It is also about, of course, about people, but Marx and Lenin and Trotsky and many of the revolutionaries, and even in the beginning of China, Mao himself,
Yeah.
were totally opposed to the personality cult, which is why it's
Yeah.
written into the Chinese constitution.
So how do they account for it?
I think it's the fact that one section of the Chinese leadership found in Mao's cult the best guarantee of ousting a right-wing section of the Chinese leadership, a revisionist Chinese leadership, and this has literally got out of control from them, and they've, you know, find it a bit difficult to withdraw, and I think it's myself.
It's a sign of the weakness of the movement there, that
Yeah.
Mao needed to use this cult of his own personality.
It seems like people need a father figure, you know, someone to lead them. There never seems to be a
But
position
you see,
of-
John, what
funnily enough,
quality.
well, it's true that even in Russia, there was no cult. I mean, Lenin hated anybody praising him in public. You know, he'd
Yeah,
write
but he
them
liked
letters
him
saying,
to
lay
do
off
it
it.
round the back, didn't he, according to Khrushchev?
No.
He would.
Well, he didn't like him to say it in public, but he liked him to sort of acknowledge what he did, you know. He wanted to...
Lenin or Stalin?
Stalin.
Oh, no, no.
Stalin.
Oh, you were talking about
Lenin.
Lenin. Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
Lenin, Stalin
Yeah.
was, of
Oh,
course.
Lenin
Stalin
was
lapped
different,
it
yeah.
up. You know, no, Lenin hated
Lenin
it. He
was
really was a very modest man. But on the other hand, it's true that people seem to need But it's partly when they haven't created an institution of their own, they need a substitute. And partly because the revolutionary institutions were weak in Russia, the Soviets,
Yeah.
they needed the little father, Lenin, you know.
Yeah, but I think we all do.
That's the problem.
But
But to the extent
create
we control our own lives, we don't.
yeah, but to create a more illusionary, but that gets like religion, father figure of the state or the image of the workers is superior to individualism. Isn't it?
You see, I mean, I think that,
yeah.
that
You know, you could with Western style communism in power, it would be possible to create, well, you know, a sort of almost imaginary workers' image of themselves as the father figure, you know.
I mean, what the workers have got, you know.
Only if they were actually, you see, so long as their life in the factory is being run by somebody else,
Yeah,
by a capitalist or even a bureaucrat,
yeah,
they'll need a father figure. But
Yeah.
if they're running their own life, which is
Yeah.
most of the time in the factory, I think you're right. They'd still need some ideals, but I
Yeah.
don't think it would take the form of a personality to nearly the same
but
extent.
I mean, it's happened in China and Russia and Cuba.
Yeah.
I mean, Fidel and
Yeah.
Che and all that. I mean, it seems that we all have this basic need for it, you know.
So people have to have more trust in themselves, you know.
That's
that
the
could be.
Yeah.
That's the question, I mean,
Yeah.
because you see, what one's got to very consciously do is instill into the working class movement a feeling of self-confidence in
Yeah.
themselves. And you can't only instill that by propaganda.
No, no.
It's when the workers begin to move themselves. They occupy a factory. When the capitalists make them redundant, they say, okay, you can bugger off. We'll run this factory ourselves. And when they actually start running the factory themselves, as happened in France in May 68,
Yeah.
then they begin to feel a sense of their own strength
Yeah,
and importance.
that is
That means that you have to give people some responsible position, you know, and all the governments are afraid of that, even Mao or
Of course.
Stalin, anybody.
Yes.
They, you know, all sort of, they like to make a revolution, but then after that, you see, they get afraid of the people and they try to limit their abilities, you know.
That's true, you see.
I lived in Cuba for a bit, Yoko, and I got the impression that they got the Americans just 90 miles away.
Oh, yeah.
They think it's too big a risk to let, and you know, they're partly wrong and partly right. Too big a risk to, and they let us, the people have a certain amount of responsibility, but until you let them have a complete responsibility, it's not really a revolution, is it?
Yeah.
You don't trust people. And
That's
like
right.
to-
It shows on the part of the leadership, in fact, a lack of self-confidence, that you can't trust the people. And I think, you see, the big difference between Mao and Stalin is this, that Stalin was a counter-revolutionary. He strangled the Russian Revolution, literally strangled it, killed all the old Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
Mao made a revolution. That's the big difference between them.
Yeah.
And then Mao did what Stalin in his wildest nightmares used to dread. Mao actually mobilized the people themselves. And when he mobilized them, the young Chinese students and workers were out onto the streets, then in many places like Shanghai and Canton, there were many groups of workers and students who said, well, we hate Liu Shaoqi, but we also think that Mao has made certain mistakes like this, like this, like this. And it created a fantastic regeneration of things. And this is, in a sense, why some of the people around Mao got scared, because they said if the development
We'll
mistake...
fall.
It's a possibility, yes. But
There's
that's...
a fantastic development of those Dart Si Bao, you know, the wall posters. Everybody wrote their own poster
Wall
in big character poster
Yeah.
at least, I think,
Yeah.
and stuck it up like very political haikus, you know, very
Yeah,
subversive
yeah.
ones. And
But
Could I
still you need Mao's photographs all over, don't you? I mean, it's like as if they're forcing Mao to take a position of a dictatorship.
Yeah, you see, I mean, that's, I must confess, I was in Peking last summer going on my way to North Korea, and it was a bit religious, this whole business of seeing small kids passing by, and actually with a teacher who then instructed them to bow before Mao. I don't think, you know, I mean, I disagree.
Because there's bound to be a reaction against that, either
That, but
before he
also the
dies or
kids won't
after.
take it seriously. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, learning what they learn at school. It just becomes a part of a sort of convention which they get over. But I
and
think...
even the counter-revolutionaries, the revisionists, or whatever you want to call them in China, used Mao. Everybody was using Mao,
Yeah.
so it becomes
It's
senseless.
meaningless. It
Yeah.
just doesn't...
Could I ask you something which sort of is related to this,
Yeah.
but sort of concerns your position, partly as an artist, and that is, I mean, there has been this fantastic colonial revolution where the peasants of the third world have started throwing off the domination of our countries. And look, they haven't created a perfect socialism, and they couldn't because they didn't have the resources, but they've done pretty well to defeat, like the largest imperialist powers in the world, like in Vietnam. Now, when we're talking about relating to that, I mean, your music to begin with, it's very interesting. I saw that, to begin with, they thought that was imperialist music.
Yeah.
Because it came out of Voice of America, they heard Voice of America.
Yeah, also there was, the Russians had put it out too, that we were capitalist robots, which we were, I suppose.
But they were pretty stupid too, not to see that there was something...
They're scared of the Western culture, because, I mean, just recently I read something where some Vietnamese up north had a secret club where they all dreamt about what they would do if they were capitalists with all the women, and they were playing rock and roll, and the actual musicians were playing it, not playing records, and they were imprisoned for 20 years because of it. I think they're so scared of Coca-Cola and rock and roll.
You're right, you see, because I'll tell you...
But I think that's silly.
But they've got to see the difference, haven't they? I mean, in Cuba, it was a really big breakthrough in 1967.
Yeah.
It was actually when Sgt. Pepper came out. They listened to it, and suddenly somebody clicked, said, this is not...
bourgeois.
It's not Coca-Cola, And they started playing it on the radio and everything.
Amazing.
And I think that, of course, the Vietnamese also really understand that, but then you get these ridiculous incidents like this one you mentioned, which is very bad.
But it's the same kind of paranoia that the West has about anything communist.
But I think that your own development is probably going to help this too, because, I mean, as you say, I think they were mainly wrong, but they were also partly right to see that the Fab Four were some part of the system.
Yeah.
As you become less part of the system, then I think they can understand that of course, there's the cultural barrier is also very big, because it just doesn't, our music doesn't
But there is the problem, as I've become more radical, like with Two Virgins or whatever, actually putting heavy statements out, that the influence grows less, it grows more strong and solid, but it diminishes. The Beatle influence is far superior to any individuals, any of us individually working. And, well, that is part of my policy, really, is to shake off teeny boppers, so it won't frighten off the other type of people, try and get through to them. So the power diminishes then.
But as you say, it's also concentrated more in a way.
Yeah.
Sorry, Yoko.
No, what I was saying is, let's face it, Beatles music was a 20th century folk song within the frame of capitalism. They couldn't do it otherwise. And the fact that they made their names big was they had to play the game within the, capitalism society, like Smiling and all that, And if the whole society changed, then, the song would change too.
Well, we did turn out to be a Trojan horse in a way.
In one sense.
That's right.
We were moved right into the centre, and then we said, fuck drugs, and the rest of it. And that's when they started dropping us.
I think you were only a Trojan horse because you were that right from the beginning, actually, that there was always that contradiction in it.
Yes.
No, he was always like that.
It did come out of the Liverpool sort of slums in a way, didn't it?
Well, the first thing we had to do was proclaim our Liverpoolness to the world and say it's all right to come from Liverpool and talk like this, because anybody Liverpool that had made it, like the comedians, Ted Ray or Tommy Hanlon, they all, and Arthur Askey, he actually said, I mean, these are only comedians, but that's what came out of Liverpool before us, was that they all had to lose their accent to get on the BBC. So in that way, we stopped the accent game, and all the middle classes were trying to talk Liverpool. That's a fact.
Did any of them...
Like Mike Darbo was on the other night saying that he always felt embarrassed about his middle classness and his voice, and for a period he would say, how are you, all right, and all that, that all those people would do that, and that the people at Harrow and Eton now all growing long hair and trying to lose their accents, you know, which is a good change.
Did anybody ever try to get you to stop using Liverpool accent or?
No.
No, they wouldn't. would
We always put it on more. Yeah.
So the Trojan horse method seems to be very successful.
Yeah, but we weren't so much aware of it. I mean,
No, but I mean, for the future thing, you know. I mean, like Ruben, I like what he did on TV and everything. But he tried to sort of let David Frost, you know, smoke marijuana or something. That was very good, you know, but it won't work, you know. But if you just gave, you know, like a cigarette, you know, marijuana in this, you know, you want this, you know, and he'll just smoke it. And he said, well, you know, isn't this...
but Rubin's position is there's no time for subtlety anymore. It's
Yeah,
time-
so it's an absurd position actually, because
I think
mean,
it helps, you know.
It does
in
help.
one
It shakes
sense,
things up, you see, Tariq. That's the point.
I mean, 'cause they're
this
very-
country needs shaking
they're
up
really-
like a
Yes,
desert needs
exactly.
water. I mean, you've got to get people
It was the best
realising
thing that happened on TV. You know.
no,
Right.
that's true.
Since
I mean-
we took Michael X on Simon D's, I think.
Well, that's it. You see,
Sneaked him in.
Tariq and I have talked on the box many a time about revolution, but somehow we're all part of a discussion
Yeah.
or being interviewed, or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it's not breaking the framework. And so, even though I don't think it could have been better done and all that, at
Yeah.
least breaking the framework once was a good thing to do.
I thought it was good to sort of incite people to do similar things, you know, be
Yeah.
disobedient in school or whatever it is, and
Or stick your tongue out.
stick your tongue out, whatever, you know, just keep insulting them.
The schools is where it could start happening, actually. 'Cause,
Yeah, well, that's where Red Mole should get at, the schools.
We are getting a lot there actually.
Especially the students.
Yeah. No, lots of school students are now reading them out.
That's good.
Do you get a sort of different pattern of correspondence? I suppose you must do now. I mean, letters that you get.
It has changed over the time, hasn't it?
Very different.
There's a few
now.
more intelligent letters than, you know, to give my love to Paul and all that, which used to be.
Very political these days, isn't it? Most of them.
Yeah, it's usually, you know, will you sort of help this way or write a letter this way and et cetera, et cetera. So it's becoming more realistic, the mail.
Why? I mean, John, what sort of were the basic reasons? You know, I'm not talking about commercial affairs.
Yeah.
Why you split up with the other?
With the others.
Yeah.
Well, because Paul is a conservative.
He votes Tory, does he?
Well, I don't think any of us have ever voted.
Yeah.
We haven't
He
actually.
is. Yeah.
But he is a conservative.
Yeah.
And always was in a way. And he's more interested in putting out sort of pop music than anything that says anything. You know? And it was just that kind of thing, you know, that at one period I just said to them, well, I think it's limiting what we're doing together, you know, and I want to work individually and not with the group anymore. I think the group image inhibits me. And it was just like that, you know. It was just a case of we got to a point where we just couldn't work musically together because I couldn't be bothered with, you know, sort of jog along happy songs, you know, about nothing in particular. I just could no longer feel it, you know.
Well, funnily enough, some of the new record is seems almost to be taking a new look at a lot of things that were there in some of the Beatles stuff in a different way. I was just thinking, for example, a lot of the old songs used to be about childhood.
Yeah.
And now
yeah.
you're talking about your real childhood.
Yeah, I was always inclined to write about childhood. Most of the childhood stuff would be from me.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, it was good stuff, but also it had a missing element. I
well, the
think,
missing
which is-
element was a reality, you know, the fact that I wasn't wanted and that my worst fears had come true, in a way. The fear that fear of not being wanted, you know. And when that finally hit home, well, it cleared the air.
Maybe that's why you had to sing about childhood in the previous time.
Yeah, because I couldn't face up to probably what was happening to me actually now. So I'd sing about childhood in a way. But I just always found that when I was writing, I would always drift back into childhood. It would come out whether I liked it or not. Because, I mean, it's just a fact that that's what makes you what you are, childhood. No? There's no getting away from it.
Could I ask about a contradiction there that comes out of the new record in a way, which is, I mean, the bad things seem to come out of childhood, the family.
Yeah.
But the good things also seem to come out of personal relationships and...
Well, with Yoko, you mean?
Well, quite. And which is really a new family, or going to be, you know.
Yeah, I'm not against family as such, you know.
Depends on how aware you are.
Yeah, if you're aware of what's happening, well, you know, you can manage. But I suppose, well, you could call communists a family too, but we just happen to be a family of two.
Yeah.
And we found ourselves in the same position, you know, with her coming from middle-class Japan and me coming from working-class Liverpool. We found out we had the same experiences, really.
That is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because this cultural and national...
That means that the world is getting smaller and smaller, you know.
Yeah.
And we just have to face that. For instance, you know, when John was saying, well, he felt that he was, singing American songs or something like that. But I really think that, I mean, there's Coca-Cola in Britain too and everything, and we sort of share more, you know, strange sort of same culture in a way, you know. Wherever you go, you have Hilton and, you know.
But did you get a lot of sort of, I mean, after you and Yoko started living together, did you get lots of sort of letters from racists and people like
Oh,
that?
yeah, yeah.
You did?
I was going to publish them one time, but it never happened. I got them all together. So, you know, all things like what the Japs did to us in the war, a lot of...
And she'll slit your throat, you know,
I did this
in the middle of the night.
sort of declaration of our living together in a show at Robert Fraser's, which is You Are Here, which was just people walked in when they got downstairs. It just said You Are Here.
That
And
was
they
a
got
reality thing.
That was pretty real. I mean, flashes of reality were always there. And then I let balloons go, and with right back to this address. And of course, it was all in the press, and a lot of letters came by the press. And there was a lot of racialism. You know, I was really shocked. You know, because I hadn't thought about it. You know, it just hadn't entered my mind really. And that might be sensible.
No, 7:15.
And it was a real shock. You know, there was a lot of just all from army people, you know, people in Aldershot and things like that, and these crazy old women and that, saying Jap bastards, and they slit our throats, and what she doesn't murder you in at night. You know, I was really, really shocked by it.
Yes,
Well, that brought us closer together, of course, you know.
About the age and the race difference.
Yeah, I mean, the subtle difference between racism and anti-femalism is just as subtle. You have to really sort of have it, a light shone on it to realise that...
I mean, there's a lot of male chauvinism.
Oh, sure. That's what I was going to ask you to. How do you treat your women? You know? I mean, because we can't really have a revolution until we include women in a way.
Absolutely.
They have to be. And it's so subtle, the way you're taught, is that it took me quite a time to realise my maleness sort of cutting off certain areas for her. And she's a red-hot liberationist in a way. And she was quick to show me where I was going wrong. It was just a built-in sort of reaction. And anybody that claims radicalism or, you know, whatever it is, I always just like to see how they treat the women, you know, and then...
Often pretty badly, actually.
Sure.
There's a lot of male chauvinism on the left, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, you can't talk about equal rights and revolution and power to the people. The people include both sexes.
Yeah.
You see, from a woman's point of view, I mean, you can't love somebody unless you're in an equal position at least, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're suppressed and all that, or everything that you do is out of fear, you know, or insecurity, and that's not love or anything. And that's why basically I think women hate men, you know.
And vice
Naturally,
versa.
or whatever, you know. And so if you have slaves around in your house, how could you make a revolution in that? Try to.
Absolutely. Actually, it is a problem which increasingly, I mean, a lot of it exists, but increasingly revolutionary men
Yeah.
who are socialists, regard themselves as Marxists, are coming to terms with now, or are having to come to terms with, because the women they live with, most of them happen to be political.
Yeah.
You know, I
That's
mean,
beautiful.
it's
Yeah.
and it
Or even
happens.
not necessarily political, but very
They
keen on women's
understand.
liberation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's political, all right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
My girlfriend's in court today, actually, on the Miss World demonstration.
Oh, great.
So,
That was
I was a
beauty.
bit guilty coming here instead. Still.
Yes,
but
She thought
Well,
I
she's
was
got her
saying-
independence now.
Well, quite. I mean, you know, she can handle that all right. But when did you come to start thinking like that?
Well, Yoko was a liberation before I met her, you know. I mean, she'd had to fight through a man's world. That the art crowd is just completely
They're very
dominated by
bitchy
men.
people.
They are.
And they're very
Yeah.
bitchy, and she'd
they
fought her way through that. So she was full of revolutionary zeal when we met. There was no ever any question about it, that we have to have a 50-50 relationship, or there was no relationship, and I was quick to learn.
Yeah,
As
it's
simple as
amazing,
that.
isn't it? Because
She
I mean,
did a
your
good article
background
in
is not
Nova
like that.
about 2 years back. So she said, "Woman is the nigger of the world," really,
that's absolutely correct.
and that was a couple of years back.
Mm.
So, and she was a friend of Kate Millett at one time.
Yes, yes, Kate is a very nice girl, you know. But she's suffering too from that, you know, because if we try to, you know, sort of be natural, then we naturally become lonely, because there's so many women willing to be a slave and everything, and usually men prefer that, you know. So you have to always take a chance of, am I going to lose my man, or, you know, whatever. Yeah, it's very sad.
Afternoon.
Kate is having, you know, sort of.
Now, we've been in the last few issues of the Mao, we've been doing a lot of interviews with these women night cleaners who go around cleaning offices.
Oh, yeah.
And how they're trying to unionize themselves, and it's an amazing story. In the latest issue, you got a story of how one of these bosses on these buildings, you know, people who pay out the money, rang up May Hobbs, who's the leader of these women, and said that if she came round to his building and tried to unionize the women working there, he'd come and break her arm.
Amazing. Yeah. They're insane, aren't they?
Yes, that's very. So we're very lucky, actually. But we have our loneliness too, don't we? I mean, together.
Yeah, the more reality you become to face, the more alone you are, because you realise how much unreality is the main
Thing that
program
keeps
of the
system
day.
going.
Yeah, yeah. And the more real we become, the more abuse we take.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
it does radicalise us in a way, you know, like being put in a corner.
But in a way, it can only be really. I mean, it's only by linking up with other people
Yeah.
against the program of the day that one can really. I mean, one just feels better. I find.
Yes, yes.
I mean, one can do it. Even one would have to do it by oneself. But if one can do it with another person, that's great.
Yes.
And then more people, that's even
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. That's true.
That's why communication is very important. I really think that, you know, books and papers, you know, still have fantastic power, you know.
Yeah.
Because there are many people who just read one book and got some kind of enlightening feeling, you know, about it, understood a whole lot, you know, and they changed their whole life, you know, in a way.
You think it's, I mean, books and paper rather than...
Rather than gone.
Yeah.
You know, because we always think, well, we just have to go to war, you know, we just have to do it
No,
that way.
but
It's very stupid to start thinking about that. And that's what the weathermen are doing. Until you've...
actually built up some
But
roots.
all revolutionists think that, you know, like
No.
we're soft to think that there's a peaceful way, but communication's a fantastic
No,
power.
but the crucial thing, surely, Yoko, is that suppose you have established roots in the masses through your propaganda, through your actions. Ultimately, when you challenge a bourgeois system and the capitalists come and try to crush you with force, then there are two options. Either you lie down and are crushed, or you fight
but
back.
before that,
Ah,
couldn't
before
we
that,
somehow
of
do
course,
it, you know?
of course.
And it is before. I mean, I know
Oh,
that
we
they
haven't
try to
reached that.
crush
That's why the weathermen are up the wall, and they don't understand that it's... I think they're just beginning to, actually. That one can't sort of go out on the streets
With a gun in hand
It's
and
ridiculous.
think that by even killing 2 policemen, you'll suddenly radicalize the American working class.
We go the other way.
Yeah, exactly. At the moment it will.
What about Ireland then?
Ireland is fascinating, absolutely fascinating situation, because what's been happening in Ireland is that the mistake or the interests of British imperialism in the 20s and 30s, that all those chickens are now coming home to roost. They thought they could have a partition, divide a country up on the basis of religion, on the basis of Protestants they'd actually planted there a long time ago, and that this situation would continue to exist. And what's happening now is that all these accumulated contradictions are blowing up in their face. And no one would have dreamt 10 years ago that the British would have to send the army back into Ireland again to keep the population under control. Their women and kids would be put up against the wall and searched. That's what's happening in Belfast and London and Derry today.
That was a good thing Rubin did, was shout about Ireland all over the TV.
Oh, yeah.
Really hit it home.
I mean, Marx actually once said something very, very crucial. In 1870, 100 years ago now, he said that unless the British working class and the British revolutionary movement understands and supports the struggle of the Irish to free themselves, they'll never be able to free themselves. It's absolutely...
The people that oppresses another
can never be free.
Yeah, sure. Well, the Southern Irish aren't exactly...
No, the government isn't. I mean, it's...
Well, the Southern Ireland is as much a creation of that phony setup as the North, really. And the real revolutions in Ireland are just as much against the regime in the South as in the North. But I think the North is going to be the weak link of the thing, you know. Of course, there's big problems in the North too, because the working class is divided according to religion. And so the Protestant workers are still... I mean,
even with the fact that they don't get a real vote or an equal vote or anything,
they get unemployment, the worst housing conditions you've ever seen. You know.
They're the poor whites of Great Britain in that sense, you know. Like the poor whites were always, in one sense, much fiercer in their anti-black hatred than as some of the whites elsewhere, the poor whites in the South, because the only privilege they had was the color of their skin. Otherwise, they were as bad off as the blacks in some cases. That's the Protestants in.
I get very excited when you talk about there's no choice but to use violence. Because in American TV, I saw this program and a kid who just came back from Vietnam or something. He's lying down in bed and the only body he has is just up from here, and it's completely cut. This is all nothing. It's just like a lump of meat, And he's just overdosed out and he's saying, well, I think it was a good experience. I mean,
because he doesn't want to face him.
It's very simple, I suppose, but after
he doesn't want to think, well, it was all a waste of time and I've just got no legs. That's the problem.
But you see, the thing is, it's such a painful thing. And when you think of violence, you just think of it conceptually. But what actually means that maybe your kid would, or yourself would not have a hand.
But Yoko, think of this. I mean, say in Northern Ireland, in those Catholic districts like Broadside and Falls Road, I mean, the police were coming in there with these specials and just shooting up the place. They killed 7 people on one evening in '69 in August when I was there. And what they were doing was really defending themselves. I mean, Bernadette Devlin, at that time they were building the barricades there. They weren't symbolic at all. Those barricades were to stop the armoured cars coming in.
Exactly.
Stop. And it's, I think that is, it's when you get defensive popular violence that is 100% justified.
Yeah, I do.
But if you go out with a gun and think you can individually pick off,
No, that's why
that's
we have to do it before that happens, I mean, I know that it sounds...
What do we do?
Well, that's why I'm saying,
That's the problem, because no social class, no ruling class in the whole of history has ever given up power voluntarily.
I know. But you see, the thing is, I think tradition is created every day, and there was no tradition or precedent of that. But I mean, was there any precedent of an age where communication is so, rapid and all that? No, still no. And the thing is, for instance, when you're publishing Red Mole and that, I think, leaders tend to be intellectual, and they mainly appeal to sort of intellectualism and all that of students, meaning college students, of course, mainly. But I mean, if you start to do something, which sounds useless because we're impatient about it, but if you start to have a column for younger kids, you know, who are not intellectualized yet, and appeal to their instincts, you know, and to, you know, educate them in a communist way, you know, I mean, with comics and that, or even, you know.
Yeah.
The movement in the States is doing some of that.
You know,
They
or sort
produce-
of lyrics and that, you know. And I think in that sense what Beatles did was fantastic, you know. They didn't use guns to do it, you know.
Yeah, but as I said, nothing happened.
Right, but I mean, there was a change, definite change. I'm not saying that
Yes,
it was
yes.
for the better or anything, I'm just saying that sometimes you can make a revolutionary change without using...
But you can't
those things.
take power,
That's the crucial thing.
because when
isn't
it comes down to the nitty-gritty, they won't let you have anything.
Yeah.
They'll give you all the right to
even-
perform
yes,
and
but
dance
you know,
for
that's
them.
the right way. For instance, the thing is, even after revolution, if people don't have any trust in themselves, then they're going to be slaves for the communist or, you know, government or something. So it's really very important to sort of, it's a long way around, but to build people's confidence, you know, that you don't need a father figure, and actually you are it, and all that, you know.
To do that, you need a focus
10
for
years.
people to, well, at least 10 years. You
Yes.
need a focus for people to organise around, and sometimes the trade union does that. It's something they can
Yeah.
defend themselves with. Sometimes a factory committee is something they can use. Or
It's a pity that like a trade union couldn't open up its own factories or something, you know.
Well, it's partly, I mean, take this Rolls-Royce. Why don't they, you know, they're big feathers and that, they have no idea of how, they haven't said workers can take over this factory and run it instead of closing it down, which they could. They
Yeah.
could. But in a way, I understand that, I mean, the snag of that would be that if you ran it in the capitalist system, you'd have to make a profit. You'd have to...
But they could put the profit back into the factory, couldn't they?
Yeah, but part of the way the system rules us
Yeah.
is not just the profits, it's the having to produce a commodity on a market.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, the co-ops, for example, are a good illustration of even, you've got a sort of workers' control in the co-ops,
Yeah.
you know, and they plough the profits back in. But either they're very inefficient in capitalist terms,
Yeah.
or if they're efficient, they're just like a capitalist firm, really,
Yeah.
in a different way. I mean, as I say, Rolls-Royce, actually some of the workers did own part of the factory, because they did own their own thing. I mean, in a way, you've got to change the system so that men control the economy and not the market, because at the moment the market says who is unemployed and who isn't. It's not any individual, even the capitalists don't decide.
Yeah.
I mean, the Indian peasants starve and that we eat the fat of the land. It's not Nixon to decide that, it's the market. How are we going to stop exploiting the third world? Only by destroying the market, the international market, whereby we get coffee and all the things that we, you know, this probably comes from Philippines or somewhere.
This is, well, Nixon does have a lot of
The
control
business.
of the market. You know, the thing is, and I know it sounds sort of very optimistic and all that, but you see, just like some fashion trend or something, you know, if you make a fashion out of it, you know, sometimes some kind of habit or idea, you know, sort of spreads rapidly.
But look, Yoko, look at the biggest fashion that has spread. The long hair, hippie fashion are dropping
Yes,
out. Well, most of the people, in fact, large numbers of them who could afford to drop out were middle-class kids.
Yes.
And the only reason they could afford to drop out was because they could afford to drop in again.
Yeah.
Yes, but
And they
you-
didn't change.
No.
Many people, I mean, some of the hippies, quite honestly, I know, who used to come with us on demonstrations to Grosvenor Square against the Americans in Vietnam and used to be beaten up with us by the fuzz. I actually saw one of these people the other day in a big car going past a demonstration, you know, and it was funnily enough a demonstration on Ireland, and in fact honking the horn of his car and hurling abuse at the demonstrators as he drove on. And that's just one incident, but it does typify.
How typical is it? I think hippies, when they're I mean, some of them have very sort of reactionary
But it was
ideologies,
an
but they're not
fashion
positively
anyway.
reactionary, and quite a lot of them become, you know, quite radical, really. And I
Not
don't
at all.
think that they're pure revolutionaries, but who of us is, you know? I mean, the general cultural impact increased the size of the movement. I don't think there's any
No,
doubt
that's
about
true.
that. It didn't change the structure.
Yeah.
It widened, the way this communication you talk about helps you build your movement. But in the end, the aim is not just to have a big movement, it's actually to
Yeah.
change society. And to
Yes,
do
yes,
that,
exactly.
that's when sorts of, I mean, the form that force will take is difficult to say. I mean, in France in 1968, there were 10 million workers on strike. I mean, there really was a big movement there, occupying the factories. Force didn't, I mean, it wasn't machine guns in the streets, it was actually barricades and with the police going out with gas and the students fighting back with rocks. And if they had these massive demonstrations of 500,000 workers in the centre of Paris. Now, if they'd occupied the government buildings, which they could have done then, what would they have done? Sent the army in to shoot down workers? They might have done, in which case you'd have to defend yourself. Probably the soldiers wouldn't have fired on them.
Yeah,
and so
the communists fucked that up, didn't the Communist Party?
Absolutely.
Because they didn't want a revolution because they're scared. And they thought they can get it by a deal at the top because they don't like the masses taking an initiative, you know.
But you know,
Madness, isn't
to
it?
talk about an extreme case, you know, Nixon is all, you know, Nixon can't be a president if 90% of the people in United States would have a different idea about it. Then he would start to, you know, sort of sing a different tune.
Yeah.
No,
they're
but-
opportunists.
Yeah, but
No,
he,
but
he
the-
has the money to
Exactly.
communicate, you see, and the opposition doesn't.
Yes, but he relies on bankers, and if the bankers started to
The
change,
bankers
But
will
why
never
should the
change.
bankers change?
That's the
If it
point.
changes, the bankers no longer exist.
yes,
Someone else
instead
will
of-
take their place. That's why you see, if you know, like some comrades say, let's go and shoot off a few dozen capitalists. So you can do that. You can shoot off.
Just goes to their
It
wives.
just goes to their wives or their sons, or otherwise the government buys it and sells it to someone else. It doesn't change anything at all. That's why even our propaganda